What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. It's not uncommon for Pokemon to come up with a few repeated inspirations every so often, but sometimes these creatures will share so many similarities that they're basically overlapping, which leads to one or more of them being overshadowed. This doesn't mean that the Pokemon are bad by any means, just that for some reason or another, people prefer or pay attention to their counterparts instead. So let's look at some of the most overshadowed Pokemon. Number 6. Maushold. This Pokemon is still new, so it may be a bit early to make this call, but I feel confident that the Tandemaus line is in fact already overshadowed. First of all, it's pretty rare to find it initially, unless you go out of your way to waste your time going to the Elite Four, knowing that you can't enter the building instead of going any other direction, but that's the least of their worries. No matter what some people might think, these family mice are not the equivalents of past staples like Sentret, Bidoof, or Patrat that would in fact be the Lechonk line, but those pigs are out and about long before you could ever find a Tandemaus, not to mention others like Fido and plenty of Pokemon. That means that you're not likely to make room on your team for some boring-looking plain old rats. I'm sorry to say that just because they're kind of cute and there's more than one, doesn't save the bland designs of these Pokemon being far too simple. I mean, would you pick the ordinary mouse that has nothing distinct about it? Or would you keep the other rodent that you already have that's also poisonous? We're already guaranteed one Pika clone per generation, not to mention other rodents that are frequently seen. So in Generation 9, when you purposefully create such an unremarkable Pokemon that is derivative of so many others, I mean, it's basically just a multiplying Minccino. Either that or it's a ripoff of the Rabbids, take your pick. And then you put plenty of other rodents out there first, you are just asking for these to be outdone by a huge pool of competition. So frankly, I have to imagine that the only justification for making the Maushold line was purely for the puns, and not even its needlessly complex evolution method can save it. Number 5. Pidove. Outside of these starters, the next most common Pokemon for players to pick up is probably the regional bird. It's no secret that flying is a decent type to take on all of the early grass and bug Pokemon found everywhere, and then you can usually take them all the way to the end game with relative ease. So then why does the Pidove line seem so off? Really, it kind of had an advantage with the whole reboot angle of Black and White, meaning there were no past options to use. But at the same time, Unova didn't allow you to catch a Pidove until well after the first gym, so you're not as likely to get attached to it as other Route 1 options. And even Unfezant's random gender differences couldn't make it more enticing than other flying Pokemon that actually offered up some coverage types. Or if you're like me, you just keep thinking that Braviary is the Unova regional bird because it's so much cooler and more powerful than Unfezant could ever be. But the woes didn't stop there, because not only does Tranquil have just one of the worst shinies ever, like seriously, it is so bad, but the Pidove line weren't even really in Gens 6 or 7. Other regional birds got to return, but you would be lucky to find this thing in the Friend Safari, and that was it. They did appear in Sword and Shield, but those games not only once again brought back numerous easily caught flying Pokemon, they also housed the first ever common pure flying type. So who would go back to the boring Pidove after that? And then of course Rookity got signed right back up for the next ones in Scarlet and Violet, just like how Starly has been a prominent feature in the last 5 games in a row, and Pidove is lucky to appear once per console. I honestly can't say I blame them for keeping the overgrown pigeons in the shadows, but at the very least they could try to make it look like they're not playing favorites and treat these birds somewhat equally as time goes on. Number 4. Zarude. So with the ever-expanding nature of Pokemon, it's only natural to reach a boiling point for legendary and mythical Pokemon, and these days you would be forgiven for forgetting a few off the top of your head. But out of all of them, I think Zarude is easily eclipsed by all the rest. Quick quiz, what generation is Zarude from? I bet at least a third of you, if not more, couldn't tell me. Some of you are still wondering why I'm pretending like an evil Mogwai is a Pokemon at all. It looks like it should be an Alolan Pokemon for sure, but it somehow comes from Galar? But of course Galar already had a Grass-type monkey pretty prominently as a starter Pokemon, debatably the most popular one, so whose bright idea was it to copy their own work in the same games? That'd be like having a fiery chicken as a Hoenn legendary back in the day. But even then, the Crown Tundra got its own grass-type legendary that had way better publicity and a quest to make you actually like them. I don't think Zarude had any in-game functionality worth talking about. And it doesn't help that Grass and Dark is a combination that wasn't super exciting because we already had Shiftry in the Galar games, but then we doubled down on it in Gen 9, again having a starter show it up and an actual base game legendary. You didn't even have to wait for some event, you could just pick it right up on the regular cartridge that you already bought. So I'm willing to bet that a good portion of players captured this snail mail out of lawn clippings before ever trying to line up a giveaway of the mythical Pokemon with the worst form change in existence. And not for nothing, but it's not like monkeys are anything unique in Pokemon either. So to make one the king of the jungle when there was no jungle for it to be in, just to make its typing even less special, makes Zarude pretty rough as far as mythicals go, leaving it to be forgotten about in favor of a decades-old cactus instead. People may complain about Zeraora not being part fighting type, but hey, at least they remember Zeraora exists. Number 3, Stantler. I didn't want to put this Pokemon here, but they don't give me much choice. Stantler has had it pretty rough over the years, first just being plain boring, so nobody really bothered with it when it had no defining attributes. It claims to kind of have ESP powers, but in Johto there's an actual psychic-powered normal hooved quadruped with horns, and this one has a second head. So Stantler was already shown up from day one. Then its niche as the deer Pokemon fell away with the Deerling family, who also had a neat seasonal gimmick, so there was no reason to ever try and use a Stantler again. But then finally, after ages of lying and squalor, its cries of relief were answered in the form of Weirdeer. Now, one might argue that a new evolution would only further alienate the original form, but the way they implemented the process of evolving the Bighorn Pokemon was actually to use it by your side for a prolonged period, so I think they actually pulled that off quite well. No, the problem is that it vanished immediately after being introduced. Within the same year, the new Psychic Evolution was banished from the most up-to-date games, even though you could still find Stantler. What an insult! Sure, you can transfer over a Weirdeer now, but you still can't evolve a Stantler freely in the modern games, meaning that your Stantler is stuck that way. And remember how I said Girafarig kind of usurped it in Gen 2? Well, apparently they caught wind of the situation and got themselves a fancy new evolution that you can obtain in Scarlet and Violet. So right when Stantler finally caught a break, its old nemesis came out of nowhere and pushed it back in the dirt. I like Girafarig quite a bit, but even I feel bad for how it constantly shows up the poor neglected deer that's been longing for the day that it will no longer be second fiddle. Number 2, Clobbopus. It's truly a shame how unloved this Pokemon seems to be. Firstly, poor Clobbopus is a victim of very bad placement, since for some reason they shoved it way up in the top corner past the 6th gym. Now yes, technically you could get a raid-in encounter for one in the wild area, but they're pretty rare, so are players really supposed to sit there wasting all of their time and wishing pieces to try for a Pokemon that they don't even know is in the game yet? Because you'll not see this line appear at all in the Fighting-type gym, which would have been the perfect place to highlight them, but no, you'll just get a face full of Surfetched instead. So you're far more likely to grab either that line or Phalanx as your fighting type before you even know that Clobbopus exists. Not only is its placement ludicrously bad because it's right after the gyms where it would be most useful in both versions, not even possible to surf over there until you beat them, but you won't even reach that far before its evolution Grapploct runs straight into your arms. Why they made it so that this angry octopus literally chases you down first thing on this route without even the chance of finding its previous stage is so baffling and backwards. It's like they were ashamed of little Clobbopus, somehow making it totally irrelevant. So not only is the Tantrum Pokemon completely outdone by every other fighting type in the region being found first, but they even buried it under its own evolution, meaning there's no reason to ever touch Clobbopus other than filling out the dex. Number 1, Jinx. This one is likely intentional, but that just makes it all the worse. Jinx was never the most popular Pokémon, but it did have its bonuses as a unique typing, and it was even part of a trio made up of weird human-looking deformities. Not that that makes them bad, just strange. However, this carried over into Gold and Silver, when all three of them got baby forms. Now, Smoochum isn't that great of a Pokémon either, but that's pretty much where the story ends. Generation 4 is really where Jinx got frozen out, ironically, because its partners left it in the dust, with Electabuzz and Magmar getting shiny new evolutions, with Jinx sitting quietly in the corner, making no noise and pretending that she doesn't exist. Yeah, it was a pretty big blow to her status as a worthwhile Pokémon when she got booted from the one area of interest that she was supposed to have, being abandoned by her friends. I mean, sure, there are real-world disputes about this Pokémon, however, other questionable or hated ones have still gotten some attention, but they just dropped Jinx faster than a choice-scarfed Ninjask. Maybe that shouldn't qualify it for being overshadowed, you would say that's more forgotten territory. But you know what does? The fact that its mantle was continued by somebody else. Mr. Mime, whether on purpose or not, has effectively replaced Jinx in every way. Not only did it get a post-introduction baby form just like all the rest, but in Gen 8, it stole Jinx's typing of Ice and Psychic, which up to that point was unique to that line. It may not be a good typing, but that was the only interesting thing the Jinx family had left. And as if that weren't bad enough, the Tap Dancing Thief went even further and took the extra evolution that Jinx should have gotten. Now, Mr. Rime is nowhere near as cool as Electivire, nor does it have the massive firepower of Magmortar's arm cannons, but the fact that it evolves at all is a clear sign that Mr. Mime is filling the massive shoes that were pilfered from Jinx all those years ago. You've honestly kind of got to admire how bold they've been in their blatant disrespect for the Jinx line, all but deleting it from the Pokédex, and then ushering in an equally creepy Pokémon that people don't like, hoping that we wouldn't notice the replacement. I'm not even a fan of Jinx or anything, but having your friends abandon you to supplant you outright with someone almost identical means that it was never a problem of not meshing well with the group, they just didn't like you. Which to me easily secures Jinx's spot as one of the most overshadowed Pokémon around. But maybe you disagree, so what do you think are some severely overshadowed Pokémon? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.